Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Tzadi Beis, Daf 92 of Pesach Pesachim. It's a good daf today. We discuss, different people that Derabanan wouldn't do korban Pesach, are Tamei Derabanan, but wouldn't do mitzvahs Derabanan, but when it comes to korban Pesach, the Derabanan waive their gezeros. And what's this? Okay, fine, great. We get to a new perek, the 9th perek, which is the last perek before the last perek. The last perek is Arvei Pesachim, which is pretty exciting. I have very fond memories of Arvei Pesachim. Hopefully that's going to be cool. The second half of Pesachim has been, I'd say, more challenging than the first half. But the interesting thing is, then you get Arvei Pesachim there at the end, which I think is a fun way to kind of wrap things up. So, anyways, we're getting to the 9th perek, which is pretty exciting stuff. And we're going to discuss Pesach Sheni a little bit more. Well, let's get started on Daf Tzadi Aleph Mebeis, 2 lines from the bottom at the Mishnah. Onein tova v'ochel pischo la'erev avalo b'kodshim. What does that mean? So, if you have a fellow who is in Onein, and we discussed this a bit yesterday, you have a fellow who is in Onein, meaning that somebody passed away and has not yet been buried yet. So, Aninus Yom is Mida Oraisa, meaning that day he is in Onein Mida Oraisa, he doesn't do any mitzvahs, but that night it's only Mida Abanon, Aninus Laila. So the thing is that by the night time, he'll only be in Onein Mida Abanon. And the rabbis waived their Derabanan status of Aninus in the context of korban Pesach, because as we've seen a number of times, because korban Pesach is stringent in that it has the punishment of kares associated with it, so the rabbi said, you know what, forget about our gezerah Derabanan when it comes to korban Pesach, and therefore in Onein at night would be allowed to eat korban Pesach, and therefore you could slaughter the korban Pesach for him for the day, during the day on Erev Pesach, and then he'll eat it with everybody else at night. Now this, as the Mishnah says, this is not the case by other kachim, by other korbanos. Let's say a fellow brought a korban shlamim when he's in Onein, so he would be, or maybe, I think Dafka we're talking about his, because we want him to be able to eat it, as we said, we said that a few days ago, that there's a mitzvah saseh to eat your korban, yet nonetheless, the Rabbanan would keep their gezerah Derabanan intact when it comes to other kachim, and an Onein would not eat other kachim, but by korban Pesach, they say that an Onein at night, and Aninus Laila would eat korban Pesach. So let's read that again. So Onein tova v'ochel pischo le'erev. So in Onein, so he just goes to the mikvah, not because he's Tamei Tumas Meis or anything, but just as Rashi says, because he wasn't able to eat kachim before, and now he's able to eat kachim, so he goes to the mikvah, and then he eats his korban Pesach at night, avalo b'kodshim, but that would not be the case by other kachim. In Onein would not eat the other kachim. Hashmei al meso, somebody who finds out that somebody passed away, right? Let's say he gets word that a relative of his passed away, more than 30 days ago, right? I think we learned in the Gemara in Eruvin that would be considered a shmua rechoka. And in that instance, so you would just practice avelos midrabanan for that one day that you hear about it, but that night already you would eat korban Pesach v'hamalakit lo atzomis, and if you're sort of moving the location of a relative's grave, so then it says aviv v'imo, maybe specifically father and mother, but in this case you would be tamei for the day, but you would be tova v'ochel b'kodshim, you would be able to eat, you'd be able to go to the mikveh and then certainly eat the korban Pesach. Although it says tov ochel b'kodshim, interesting. Does that mean all kodshim? Le'erev da'afilu yom gufim d'Rabbanan hu. Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, it sounds like that this seems to be all kodshim. No, right, not just korban Pesach, right? So when it comes to hashumei al meso amlakit lo atzamos, Rashi says, right, tov ochel b'kodshim le'erev at night. Da'afilu yom gufei midrabanan, because even during the day it's midrabanan, right? So as opposed to an Onein, which during the day is midoraisa, but at night it's midrabanan. Even during the day over here it's midrabanan, so at night you would be able to eat any kachim, it sounds like. Gershon is Geyer. If you have a fellow who converted to Judaism, Erev Pesach, on Erev Pesach, wow, sounds like a busy day. Interesting. So Beis Shammai says, look, you have a fellow who converted to Judaism on Erev Pesach. So, great. Welcome. Go to the mikveh. Join us in our korban Pesach. Beis Hillel says, well, as part of his conversion process, he did bris milah. Now, aporish mina orla is kaporish mina kever. A fellow who separates from his foreskin, it's like he's separating from a grave, i.e. he's going to be tummy for 7 days, and you have to sprinkle the mechatas and all that stuff, so he's not going to be able to eat korban Pesach that night. The Gemara is going to go into a little bit more detail over here. Let's go weiter in Shas. Says the Gemara, my time, how come an onain is allowed to eat the korban Pesach? So the Gemara answers, Savaninas Laila Derabanans, because the Tana of our Mishnah assumes that Aninus Laila, being an onain at night, is only midirabanan, v'gabe Pesach la'amidu devreim b'makom karis, and therefore in the context of a korban Pesach, where the punishment in the context of korban Pesach is karis, so the Rabbanan said, you know what, don't worry about our Derabanan status of onain at night, eat the korban Pesach. However, by other kachim, even though there's a mitzvah saseh to eat your own korban, so if you bring epis a korban shlamim, so you have mitzvah saseh to eat your own korban. However, the Rabbanan would keep intact their gezerah and say if you're an onain, maybe let's say you brought I imagine that you probably wouldn't, if you're an onain, you probably shouldn't be bringing a korban shlamim. But let's say you brought a korban shlamim and then you found out that a relative passed away. So the Rabbanan would say that you would not eat your shlamim even at night. And even though there's a mitzvah saseh to eat it, they would say don't do it, because there's aninus laila, which is Derabanan. And as we learned to Masechta Brachos, they can say sheval taisa sheni, that this is a case where they're not telling you to violate anything, they're just saying don't do something, don't eat your korban since you are an onain, and that they can do with Derabanans. Said the Mishnah Shomer al Meso v'chulei. The Mishnah had said that somebody who finds out that a relative had passed away more than 30 days ago. So I assume it's talking about more than 30 days ago. So he can eat korban Pesach that night, or really he can eat any kachim at night. And then it also said somebody who is gathering the bones of a relative. So says the Gemara, so the Gemara asks, 1 second, this whole gathering, right? If you have a fellow who is relocating the grave of his parents, well, isn't he going to be tamei because he's touching bones? So the Gemara says no, it doesn't mean that he himself is doing it. It means that other people are doing it for him. So even if other people are doing it for him, for that day he's going to be tamei midirabanan. But or I guess even no. So it sounds like aninus. And so it's not tumah, but right down, because he's not tamei. But the aninus is only going to be derabanan even during the day. But that night he can eat kachim as long as other people are relocating the grave for him. Gershon is Geyer v'chulei. Okay. So the Mishnah had said that a fellow who converts to Judaism on Erev Pesach, Beis Shammai says that he can join a korban Pesach that night. Beis Hillel says he cannot. How come? So this machlokas, when we're talking about an arel, is specifically a non-Jewish arel, i.e. somebody who converted to Judaism and got a bris milah in the context of his conversion. The Beis Hillel Savre, Beis Hillel say, do not eat the korban Pesach that night. Gezerah shema yitame l'shana haba, because Beis Hillel is concerned, what happens if next year he's also tamei on Erev Pesach? So next year he's going to be a Jew. He already converted the year earlier. Now it's the next year. And he becomes tamei tumas hames. And it's Erev Pesach. V'yomar, and he's going to say, well, ishtaki milo tavalti v'achalti. Well, last year, when I was non-Jewish, and I was converting, and I was tamei, I mean, during my non-Jewish life, I had been to cemeteries and things like that, I had tumas hames, and I was just converting, and I went to the mikveh, and I ate the korban Pesach, so achshav nami etva v'ochal. So he'll assume that the same would apply this year. Why should this year be any different? And he'll say, look, okay, I'm tamei, tumas hameis, but just like last year, I went to the mikveh and then I joined the korban Pesach. Let me just go to the mikveh this year also and join the korban Pesach. V'lo yada, and he won't realize the ishtakid nachri hava v'lo mekabel tuma. But you won't realize that there's a big nafkamina, which is that last year he was not Jewish, and therefore tuma wasn't really a thing. It's a Jewish law, not a non-Jewish law, and therefore he wasn't actually technically tamei. Sure, he had gone to funerals and graves and things when he was non-Jewish, but that didn't make him tamei. Whereas now he's a Jew, and as a Jew, the halachos of Tumah and Taira apply, and now he's takatami tumas hameis, and he's not allowed to simply go to the mikveh and join a korban Pesach. So therefore, since Beis Hillel is concerned that if we allow this person who converts to simply go to the mikveh and eat the korban Pesach, it might lead to a misunderstanding the following year if he's Tamei Tumas Hameis, and he might end up just going to the mikveh and eating korban Pesach that night. So therefore, Beis Hillel says that even when he converts, and technically speaking, he would be able to go to the mikveh that night and go to the mikveh and then join the korban Pesach that night. Beis Hillel says he should refrain. Whereas Beis Shammai hold, lo gazrinon, we do not make this gezerah, and therefore Beis Shammai says, look, he can simply go to the mikveh and then eat korban Pesach that night. Aval Oral Yisrael, but if you have a yid who, for whatever reason, had not yet been circumcised, and then on Erev Pesach, he got a bris milah, so he would be able to, everyone agrees that he can just go to the mikveh and join the korban Pesach that night, and we don't say, yeah, but if you allow an Oral Yisrael to simply go to the mikveh and join a korban Pesach that night if he gets a bris, so maybe you'll say, well, if I say that an Oral Yisrael is allowed to join a korban Pesach, so maybe I'll say the same thing by an Oral Nachri, and Beis Hillel says that we don't say the same thing by an Oral Nachri, so we say no, we don't make that gezerah. Okay, so the machlokas between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai specifically by an Oral Nachri, but by an Oral Yisrael, everyone would agree that he would be able to go to the mikveh and join a korban Pesach. Tani Nami Yachi, we talk alone in a brayso like this. I'm Reb Shimon ben Elazar, lo nechliku Beis Shammai Beis Hillel al Oral Yisrael shetov v'ochel es pischo v'lo erev. Right, says Reb Shimon ben Elazar that Beis Shammai Beis Hillel agree when it comes to an Oral Yisrael that he can push it, go to the mikveh, and then eat korban Pesach that night. Amanechliku, where do they argue al Oral Nachri? Beis Shammai om tov v'ochel es pischo v'lo erev. Beis Hillel om aporish min ha'orla kiporish min ha'kever. They davka argue by a fellow who's non-Jewish and is converting to Judaism, and in the context of that conversion, he gets a bris milah. So Beis Shammai says that he could possibly go to the mikveh and eat korban Pesach that night. Beis Hillel says, no, aporish min ha'orla kiporish min ha'kever. Somebody who separates from the foreskin, it's like he's separating from a grave, and therefore he's tamei, and he can't simply go to the korban Pesach that night. Zok the Gemara, Amarava says Rava, Aral Azov Ismail Amidu Devreim b'makum karis. Oninu Mitzor v'Sapras Lo Amidu Devreim b'makum karis. Alright, let's read it again. It says Rava, Aral Azov Ismail Amidu Devreim b'makum karis. That when it comes to an Aral, somebody who doesn't have a bris milah, and then gets a bris milah in this case, Hazah, we'll get there in a minute, but we've seen it before, sprinkling the mei chatas on the 7th day of Tumas Hameis when it's Erev Pesach, and Ismail carrying the knife to do a bris milah on Shabbos. So we have a din Derabanan, and the Rabbanan sort of kept the Rabbanan hamidu devreim b'makom kares, right? They upheld their din Derabanan even in the context of kares, and we're going to explain it in a minute. Onen u'mitzora v'sapras, whereas when it comes to an onen and a mitzora and a besapras, which we've seen before. Well, we're going to get there in a few minutes. Lo amidu devreim b'makom kares. The rabbis did not, extend their din d'Rabbanan in the context of kares, i.e., they waived it. We're going to explain all of these cases. So, Aral hadar amaran. So, when we say in Aral hamidu devreim b'makom kares, it's the case that we just explained. That according to Beis Hillel, a person who converts to Judaism and gets a bris milah on Erev Pesach would not partake in the korban Pesach that night, even though Meikar Adin he can. Beis Hillel says that Derabanan he does not, out of a gezerah that maybe next year he'll be tamei, that whole thing. And we say you're not going to do korban Pesach, even though Meikar Adin you can. Because of it in Derabanan, we're going to say that he would not. Haza'ah, what's this sprinkling of the mei chatas? To Amar Mar, we said earlier, where was that? On Daf Samachay, almost 30 days ago. Haza'ah shvus v'enudoches haShabbos, that sprinkling the water of the para aduma for someone who is tamei tumas hameis on day 7, if Erev Pesach is Shabbos, so then Haza'ah is a shvus. It's also midirabanan, and it's not doche Shabbos. So we see that this fellow is not going to bring korban Pesach, and because of this din derabanan, that we don't want to sprinkle the water of the para aduma on him. Izmal, what's the case of the knife of the bris milah? Titania, as we learn in a brisa, is going back to Masechta Shabbos, Daf Kuf Lamed. Kshem she'ein mevin, also derech reshus harabim, just like you don't bring the knife by way of the public area. Kach and mevin also, you also don't bring it derech gagos, by ways of roofs, derech chatzeris, by way of courtyards, derech karpefis, and by way of non-residential spaces. Remember these in Yonim? So therefore, and as Rashi points out, that milas zechar v'avada is ma'akvasim lecho b'Pesach, that if you have a fellow who has children or slaves who are not circumcised, so he cannot offer his korban Pesach. And we're saying that, let's say he has a child who needs to get a bris milah, so you would not bring the knife, even by way of these derabanan spaces, in order to do the bris milah. And even though that means that this fellow is not going to be bringing the korban Pesach that night. Onein hada amaran, when we say that by onein they taka waived their din derabanan, it's that which we said, i.e. that in onein aninus laila is midirabanan, yet they said don't worry about aninus laila, you can eat the korban Pesach anyways. There mitzora mahi, what is the din derabanan when it comes to a mitzora that they waived in the place of karis? The Tanya, as we learn in a brisa, mitzora shechol shmini shelo be'erev Pesach. Okay, so you have a mitzora. He had leprosy. He did the whole quarantine thing. It's finally over. And now, day 8. Meaning, what's day 8? Day 7 is when he becomes tahor, if he hasn't seen any tzaras for 7 days. So that's when he becomes tahor. He goes to the mikvah, that whole thing. And then on day 8, he has to bring his korbanos. He's mechusar kippurim. Okay, fine. So day 8 is a busy day. He's got to go to the Beis HaMikdash, korbanos, all sorts of inyanim. Now, part of that is that he goes to, as we learned the other day, that he goes to Shar Nikanor. Shar Nikanor was the gate of the Azara. So now, to get to the gate of the Azara, right, the Azara would be considered Machne Shechina, but to get there, he has to walk through Machne Leviyah, right? Harabais is Machne Leviyah. So he has to walk through Machne Leviyah, and then he stands by Shar Nikanor, which we said did not get the Kedusha Azara, and he sticks in his thumbs. Now, V'ra'a keri bo bayom. Now, we threw a shtickle wrench in here that Itaka saw keri. He saw sperm that day. Now, therefore, Baal keri, as we learned the other day, and Daf Samach Zayin, basically has the same din of a zav in terms of quarantine, i.e., he's not allowed into Machne Leviyah. So now, here it is, Erev Pesach. Thank God, he's done being a mitzora. That was yesterday, he finished. Went to the mikvah, now it's day 8. He's got to bring his korbanos, he's got to go to Shar Nikanor, which is in Machne Leviyah, and then he saw keri. Now he's not allowed into Machne Leviyah. Which means that if he can't go into Machne Leviyah, he can't properly do his korbanos, which means that he can't eat korban Pesach that night. So tova v'ochel, so we say that he could just go to the mikvah for his keri, and he can eat korban Pesach that night. Amru Chacham, the Chacham said, Afapisha tvul yom eino nichnas ze nichnas. Even though in general a tvul yom would not go into the Machne Leviyah, this fellow is permitted. Mutav yavo esei sheyesh bo kares v'yitcha esei she'ein bo kares. So the esei sheyesh bo kares, i.e. korban Pesach, which is a mitzvah saseh that has kares associated with it, should override a mitzvah saseh that doesn't have kares in it. That mitzvah saseh is that it says, in the context of a tvul yom, it says, Uchuva shemesh yavo al toch hamachne. That night he can go into machne, into the machne. Fine, Peseder. Now, Ba'amar Rabbi Yochanan, it says Rabbi Yochanan Tvar Torah afilu asay ein bo. It says Rabbi Yochanan, actually the truth is, mida oraisa, it's completely permitted for a tvul yom to go into to machne levia. Right, mida oraisa, basically this fellow who is he's a balkari, he went to the mikveh, he's a tvul yom, mida oraisa, he's allowed into machne levia. Shneimar, as the pasuk says, Vayamud Yoshafat b'kal Yehuda, that Yoshafat stood up in the congregation of Yehuda v'Yushalayim, b'veis Hashem, lefnei hachatzer hachadasha, before the new chatzer. My chatzer hachadasha, what's this new chatzer? Shechidshu bo davar, that they made a chiddush, they made a din derabanan, v'amru tvul yom lo yikanis b'machne levia, and they said that a tvul yom can't go into machne levia. So we see that it's really only midrabanan that a tvul yom is not allowed to go into machne levia. And therefore, you have this fellow, he was a mitzorah, and now it's day 8. He's got to bring his korbanos. And to bring his korbanos, he's got to go to Shar Nikanor. Shar Nikanor is a machne levia. Now the thing is, he was a balkari. Now balkari, even if he goes to the mikvah, then he's a tvul yom. And a tvul yom is not going to be allowed into the machne levia. However, apparently that's only really midrabanan. And the Rabbanan waived that and said he's allowed to go into the machne levia, so he can go to Shar Nikanor and get his proper kapara so that he can eat korban Pesach that night. Okay? Beis HaPras, and what's the situation of Beis HaPras where they waived it b'makom kares? Now, what's a Beis HaPras? A Beis HaPras is a field that there was a grave in the field, and then the field got plowed. And now we have to be concerned that there might be an etzem kisaora, a bone the size of a barley kernel, somewhere lying on the field, and you might end up stepping on it, and it'll be matami tumas hesed. So that's what a Beis HaPras is, and it's only midrabanan. Mistameh because mida oraisa, safek tumah b'shus harabim is tahor. I assume that's pshat, that's why it's only also midrabanan. Titnan b'shami b'sil, that b'shami b'sil agree shebodkin lo say Pesach and bodkin lo chli truma. That, however, if you have a fellow who is on his way to go bring his korban Pesach and he needs to pass through a Beis HaPras, so you can just check out the field, and as long as you ascertain that there's no there's no tumah in the field where you're walking, so then that would be acceptable. So that is acceptable in the context of korban Pesach, but not, let's say, if you're going, to eat truma. You'd have to go around. My boat, what does it mean that you check it? Amar Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Menapech, Beis HaPras v'holech. Rabbi Yehuda says the name of Shmuel, that you can just basically blow away the ground in front of where you're on the path that you're going to walk on. And as long as, you don't uncover any bones when you're blowing, and if you do, I guess, don't step on them. So that's how you just kind of check it and make sure that there's no bones, and you can walk through it in order to do korban Pesach. Rav Yehuda bar Ami Mishmei Rav Yehuda Amar Beis HaPras Shenidash Tahor, that a Beis HaPras that was enough people walked on it that it's a well trodden path and there are no bones there, so then it would be tahor, and that would be okay. Hajan alacha isha. Okay, so we see that also when it comes to Beis HaPras, which is also midrabanan, you would be allowed to just kind of do whatever checks that you'd have to do in order to walk through it, so you can do your korban Pesach. So again, they waived their din derabanan in the context of kares, korban Pesach that has a chiyuv of kares associated with it. We will come back to you. Ha'isha, new perek, new mishnah, mishahaya tameh over there rechoka, v'lo asa es harishin, yaisa es hasheni. If you have a fellow who was impure or he was far away and he did not do the Pesach Rishon, so he does the Pesach Sheni. If you have a fellow who was b'shogeg for whatever, somehow he didn't realize that, let's say it was Erev Pesach, or something crazy came up and he just was unable to bring the korban Pesach, so in those cases he could bring the Pesach Sheni. If so, why does it say specifically tamei and derech rechoka if it's really any shogeg or ones? So she'elu p'tur me'ikaris ve'elu chayav be'ikaris. So these are chayiv kares and these are not chayiv kares. This does not make sense at the moment. We don't have enough info. We're going to get there in the Gemara. Says the Gemara, Itmar, it was stated, what if you have a fellow who is far away, and right now he's outside of Jerusalem, he's far away, he's considered b'derech rechoka, but he could make it to Jerusalem by the time that they're eating korban Pesach. So right now he's b'derech rechoka, he's far away, so he's parted from bringing the korban Pesach. However, he could have messengers in Jerusalem slaughter the korban Pesach for him, and he'll be able to make it in time to eat it that night. So, if you have a fellow who's far away, and they slaughtered the korban Pesach, they threw its blood on the mizbeach for him. Rav Nachman Omer hurtza, Rav Sheshes Omer lo hurtza. So Rav Nachman says, great, givaldik. Rav Sheshes says no, that isn't okay. If he's far away, you cannot. Right? Just like if he's tamei, you would be unable to slaughter the korban Pesach for him. So also, if he's far away, you're not allowed to slaughter the korban Pesach for him. Rav Nachman Omer hurtza, mechas hu dechasachmana olav v'yovid tavalav bracha. Rav Nachman says when we say hurtza, then when we say if you slaughter the korban Pesach for somebody who's far away, it's fine. Well, because the Torah had mercy on him. They said, look, if a fellow is far away, he doesn't have to bring korban Pesach. If he wants to, givaldik. Tavalav bracha, he should be blessed. Rav Sheshes Amar lo hurtza mid chadachi rachmana b'kitame. Rav Sheshes says no. Even if a fellow who's far away would like to slaughter the korban Pesach and he's got messengers who can do it for him, it doesn't work. The Torah says, Tamei, derech rechoka, whether you're Tamei, whether you're far away, do not bring the korban Pesach. Do the Pesach sheni. Amar Rav Nachman ben Aminallah, Rav Nachman says, how do I know that if a fellow is far away, he can optionally offer the korban Pesach if he'll make it to Jerusalem by nighttime? The Tananis, we learn in our Mishnah, that the Mishnah says if you have a fellow who is tamei or he was b'derech rechoka v'lo asa and he didn't do it, says the Gemara, implying, but if he wants, he can. If he was far away and he didn't do the korban Pesach, that's fine. Just bring a Pesach sheni. But if he wanted to, he could have even brought the Pesach rishon. If he didn't, so do Pesach sheni. But if he wants to, he could do Pesach rishon. Rav Sheshes Amar, Rav Sheshes is going to say to you, if that's the case, that when it comes to derech rechoka, it says, right, Mishaya Tamei, over derech rechoka, V'lo asa Pesach, Yaisa Pesach sheni. So then we're saying it means that in the event that he didn't do the Pesach rishon, then he does the Pesach sheni. Well, Rav Sheshes argues if that's the case, then you're going to have to read the Sefer the same way. The Katani, it says, Shagag onenas v'lo asa sarishon. If you have a fellow who accidentally or something crazy came up, and for that reason he didn't do the Pesach rishon, Yai says a sheni, so he does the Pesach sheni. So Rav Nachman, are you going to learn v'lo asa in the Sefer the same way as in the Reisha? I.e., you're going to say if you have a fellow who made a mistake or something came up, and therefore, right, and he didn't do the korban Pesach, so he does Pesach sheni, implying that if he wanted to, he could have done the Pesach rishon. That doesn't really make sense in the context of shogeg and ones. Hare shogag, hare nenas. I mean, he made a mistake or something came up. Like, it's not like, and he didn't do it, but if he wanted to, like, it doesn't, if he wanted to, it doesn't really make sense in the case of somebody who made a mistake or something came up. What do you mean he wanted to? I mean, this wasn't about wanting to or not wanting to. Like, it just didn't happen. Elamezid katani badayu. Rather, what does it mean when it says v'lo asa in the context of shogeg and ones? V'lo asa in that case is referring to mezid. Meaning, if you have a fellow who was a shogeg or an ones, v'lo asa pesach, v'lo asa, and the v'lo asa means a fellow who on purpose didn't bring the korban Pesach. So in all these cases, you'd bring the Pesach sheni, which is interesting, that somebody who intentionally does not bring a Pesach rishon, he still brings a Pesach sheni. Right? So elamezid katani badayu. So rather, when it says in the Sefer of v'lo asa, it's talking about somebody who didn't do the korban Pesach on purpose. He could bring the Pesach sheni. Hachanami, and here also, therefore, in the Reisha says of Sheshes, just like in the Sefer, v'lo asa is coming to include a mezid in the Reisha when it says v'lo asa. Onen katani badayu. It's coming to teach about an onen, that if you have a fellow who's an onen, that we learned in the previous Mishnah, that an onen would do korban Pesach, but if he didn't, so then he'll do Pesach sheni. Rav Ashi masnisan amideka, and Rav Ashi says that you can actually argue that our Mishnah makes a lot of sense the way that Rav Sheshes is explaining it. Tikatani elu pturin meikaris ve'elu chayavim bikaris. That the Mishnah had said that these people are chayiv karis and these people are patur from karis. We didn't really understand what that means, right? The Mishnah had mentioned somebody who's tameh, somebody who's far away, somebody who's shogeg, somebody who's ones, and now we're saying some of them are chayiv karis, some of them are not. Who's chayiv karis and who's not? Hey, what's going on? Ilema shogeg v'nenas. If you're saying that it's talking about shogeg and ones, shogeg v'nenas b'nei karis nenu, what are they going to be chayiv karis now? Chayiv karis, they forgot. Something came up. They couldn't do it, whatever it was. And it's not talking about the Tamid and the Derech Choka. They're not chayiv karis. So Elalav amazed v'onen. Rather, it must be, like Rav Sheshes is saying, that lo asa in the Reisha is coming to include onen, and lo asa in the Seifa is coming to include mazid. And when we're saying that people are patur from karis, it's talking about the Tameh, Derech Choka, Shogeg, and Onis. When we're saying chayiv karis, it's talking about onen and mazid. Rav Nachman Amalach, Rav Nachman is going to say to you, le'olam amazid lechude. No, really, when it says lo asa in the Reisha, it's not coming to include onen. It's mamish saying that if you have a fellow who is far away and he volitionally did not do Pesach Rishon, so then he could do Pesach Sheni. But if he wants to, he can also do Pesach Rishon if he wants. In the Seifa, Rav Nachman says, I agree. When it says Shogeg and Ones Vilo Asa, that's coming to include a Mazid. And Uvedinu de Ibayle lemisna Chayiv. And really, what it should have said is he's going to be Chayiv Karis in the singular because it's only a Mazid. There's no Onin being discussed in this Mishnah. So really, it could have said that Kilu, this fellow who didn't do korban Pesach, in the Seifa, we're saying we're Chayiv Karis is Davka the Mazid, and it could have just said Chayiv, singular. By the Ketani Chayavin, the reason why it says plural is Aidi the Tana Reisha Pturin Tana Seifa Chayavin. Because since in the Reisha it says Pturin, right? If we said that these people are Pturin from Karis, so then it also says that some of them are going to be Chayavin in the plural, but really it is only referring to the Mazid alone. Onen is not included in this Mishnah, and says Rav Nachman that a fellow who is far away can have the korban Pesach slaughtered and blood thrown on the mizbeach for him if he is planning to be in Jerusalem by the nighttime. Omer Rav Sheshes says, Rav Sheshes Menah, how do I know that somebody who's tameh, somebody who's b'derech choka, somebody who's far away, is unable to offer the korban Pesach even if he wants to? Titania, as we learn in the Brayso, Rabbi Akiva Omer says, Rabbi Akiva, Nemar Tameh v'Nemar b'derech choka. Says Rabbi Akiva that in the same pasuk that we've seen a million times, it says somebody who is tameh o b'derech choka, or who is far away. Matameh shesipek b'yadu lasos ve'no oseh, av derech choka nami shesipek b'yadu lasos ve'no oseh. Just like tameh, if you have a fellow who's, let's say, tameh tumas sheretz, which of course we know is a machlokas, but somebody who's tameh tumas sheretz, a dead sheretz falls on him, and okay, so Beseder, he can go to the mikveh, and then that night already he'll be tahor. And yet, we're saying that he wouldn't offer the korban Pesach. So the same thing applies also to Derech Choka. Yeah, sure, you can make it to Jerusalem by that night, but still, don't do the korban Pesach, just like a tummy person won't do the korban Pesach, do Pesach Sheni. Rav Nachman Omerlach, Rav Nachman will respond, look, don't bring me a rye from Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva the time, the Ksav and Shochtem v'Zorknat Misharetz, Vana Svirli, Commandom Shochtem v'Zorknat Misharetz. Says, look, yeah, Rabbi Akiva holds like the opinion that you don't slaughter and do Zrikas Adam for somebody who's Tamei Tumas Hasharetz, but we've seen it's machlokas. We dafka saw the other day machlokas between Rav and Ula. Apparently even Rabbi Akiva gets involved in this machlokas. But says Rav Nachman, I hold like the opinion that says that you would be allowed to do Shchitas, Korban Pesach, and Zrikas Adam for a fellow who is Tamei Tumas Hasharetz. Therefore, just like you can do Shchita and Zrika for him, you can also do Shchita and Zrika for somebody who's far away. Well, friends, that was daf, what was it? Tzadi Beis? Yeah, I think so. That was daf 92 of Masechta Pesachim. So the daf started off talking about different people who are like Tamei Derabanan and can do korban Pesach, such as in Onain, Aninus Laila is only Derabanan, so we would say you would do the korban Pesach. And then we got into an interesting machlokas about an oral. If you have a fellow who converts to Judaism on Erev Pesach, so can he do korban Pesach that night? Beis Shammai says, yeah, sure he can. Of course, the mikveh does korban Pesach that night. Beis Hillel says he doesn't because as part of the conversion process, he got a bris milah, and therefore, a porish min ha'orla k'porish min ha'kever, somebody who separates from his orla, it's like he is separating from a grave, i.e. he's tummy for 7 days. The reason for this gezerah is because we're concerned that, well, if he goes to the mikveh that night, if he goes to the mikveh that day and eats korban Pesach that night, what will happen if next year maybe he will be tummy tumas hameis and he'll think that he can just go to the mikveh and eat korban Pesach at night. So therefore, Beis Hillel says that he should not eat the korban Pesach that night. However, if we're talking about an Arel who's a Jew, well, in that case, he would just go to the mikveh, meaning if he gets a bris milah, he'd go to the mikveh and eat korban Pesach that night. Okay? And then Rava gave a number of examples where, 3 examples where the din derabanan overrides, is kept in place in the face of korban Pesach, which has a chiyuv kares associated with it, and 3 examples where we waive the din derabanan in the context of kares. What are those examples? The ones where they kept it in place, we said orla, haza'ah, and also the ismol, right? Doing bris milah for your child or your slave in order to do korban Pesach. And then the examples where it was waived was a mitzora, an onain, and a beis hapras. Then we got onto the new perek 9, and we have a new. We got to the Mishnah, which discussed somebody who's tamei b'derech rechoka. We got to machlokas between Rav Sheshes and Rav Nachman about somebody who's far away, who's outside of Jerusalem. Well, we're going to see some machlokas exactly how far away, but somebody who's considered to be far away, and he does not do. He's part of. He doesn't do korban Pesach. The question is, can he bring a korban Pesach if he wants to? If he'll be in Jerusalem by that night, can he have somebody slaughter the korban Pesach for him? If Nachman says yes, if Sheshes says no, have a great day, everyone. Peace out.